Hello and welcome back to the Library of Ruina Ranked Abnormality Edition. In this video, we'll be ranking the abnormalities from Yesod's floor. This floor has quite a few incredible pages, so let's get right into it. Starting us off in Tier 1, we have Rhythm. This page gives the selected librarian 1 rhythm each scene. Rhythm is a status effect that gives the user 1 strength, but makes them take 2 to 5 stagger damage from attacks, and they lose 1 stack of rhythm each scene. Additionally, characters with rhythm have a 25% chance to give a random character 1 rhythm at the start of the next scene on hit. This page provides some marginal buffs, but has a few issues. First is that it's somewhat inconsistent since you're more likely to give enemies the buff than allies, and not just always triggering, and the extra stagger damage on your librarians can be an issue. There is a consideration for the buff disproportionately helping you and the debuff disproportionately hurting the enemy, but all of Yesod's abnormality pages are pretty good, so unfortunately for Rhythm, it's stuck in F tier. In D tier, we have Lament. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes them deal 2 to 4 bonus damage against enemies with status ailments, and if the librarian has a status ailment at the start of the scene, they gain 1 to 2 strength. This page requires a bit of build around, but in decks that can inflict status ailments on themselves is extremely strong. If you only inflict ailments, then it's not amazing though. Against enemies that inflict status ailments, this shoots up in strength because you get the main effect basically for free. The downside of Lament is that it requires some amount of assistance to be useful, which means it ends up near the bottom. Request is our C tier page. This gives a single ally a buff that marks the first enemy the librarian hits as long as no other enemies have the mark. The selected librarian deals 3 to 5 bonus damage against the marked target, and if they kill the marked target, they fully recover their stagger resist and get twice as many books. The extra books don't matter for this review, but Request is quite strong. Fully restoring stagger resist is very good, and being able to do it multiple times is downright busted. Request only gets C tier though because it's a bit unwieldy since the selected librarian needs to get the final hit. You need to plan your targeting ahead, and the rest of the page's effect is somewhat weak. In B tier, we have Metallic Ringing. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes their blunt attacks inflict an additional 1 bind and paralysis next scene, excluding mass attacks. While fairly simple, this effect is very strong. Paralysis infliction is very potent, and being able to consistently give multiple enemies multiple paralysis makes fights much easier. Bind is less powerful, but still very useful for clash manipulation and just making fights go faster. Being restricted to blunt attacks is unfortunate and makes the page a bit weaker, but still very strong in the right deck. Our A tier page is Violence. This is a very simple page that gives a buff to a single librarian that lowers the minimum value of all their dice by 1 while raising the maximum value by 3. This makes their attacks a bit more inconsistent, but on average it's a +1 power boost that is unaffected by power nullification. This page has some marginal synergy with pages that have a minimum roll of 1 because it's a 1.5 power boost, and power boosting passes are generally very strong. But this page isn't quite as strong as our S tier page, which is repetitive pattern recognition. This page gives a buff to a single ally that restores 1 light and gives 1 to 2 haste next scene for every 3 clashes they win. On a reasonably strong clasher, this page lets you throw out multiple high cost pages each scene without the worry of running out of light. There's a positive feedback loop with this page where you use a 3 cost bomb to destroy a 2 cost page, winning 3 clashes and restoring a light, which lets you cast another 3 cost next scene and repeat until you win. This is a page that I underestimated in my first playthrough, but winning clashes is very easy when you have an extra 3 light every scene compared to what you normally would have. Moving on to tier 2 pages, we have the 7th Bullet. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes them deal 1 to 7 bonus damage with offensive dice. Additionally, whenever an offensive dice draws or loses a clash, it deals damage equal to the dice value of the opponent, but every 7th non-mass attack page targets random characters, including allies. The bonus damage is decent, and the clash effect is interesting, but none of them is very consequential considering if you tie or lose, then you probably didn't roll super high anyways, but the downside is quite real. Of course, you can just time it such that it's a light regen or something in case it targets your allies, but the juice is not nearly worth the squeeze in this case. Recharge is our D tier page. This gives a buff to a single ally that makes them deal 2 to 7 bonus damage with attacks and gain 1 to 2 haste if they have maximum light at the start of the scene. The effect isn't incredibly powerful and it's a bit awkward to trigger, but you get a few guaranteed triggers whenever you emo up, and there's some synergy with repetitive pattern recognition. However, I usually would rather just take a tier 2 page that gives me dice power. In C tier, we have Eternal Rest. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes them deal 2 to 7 bonus damage and 2 to 5 bonus stagger damage to the enemy with the lowest current HP. While somewhat restrictive in your targeting, this is very consistent and reasonable buff. Extra stagger damage is very appreciated, and while it doesn't provide any power utility, it's one of my favorite pure damage pages. Musical Addiction is in B tier for us. This page gives a single ally a buff that boosts defensive dice power by 1 to 3, but makes defensive dice roll 1. This is quite a powerful buff, but quite a sizable downside. Note that defensive dice will always roll 1 regardless of other buffs or even the dice roll range. Considering most of the best pages all have 1 defensive die, this downside is more than just a matter of just don't put defensive pages in the deck. Of course, you can just bite the bullet and accept that sometimes you're gonna roll 1, but Musical Addiction isn't the reason why Yesod's floor is often considered one of the best ones. Clean is our A tier page. This gives a buff to a single ally that increases their offensive dice power against slower enemies, boosting 1 power per point of difference with a maximum of 3. This page is quite strong, if not a bit inconsistent. There'll always be ways each scene to get at least a couple of your dice to have the maximum boost, but the reason it's an A tier is because of the synergy with the strongest. Turning your lowest speed die into infinity die has the obvious benefit of giving you a guaranteed +3 no matter what, but also since you only need 1 point of difference to get a buff, unlike Mio's prowess which needs 2, you're very likely to be able to get a boost on all your dice. Without the strongest or our S tier page, it would be in B tier below Musical Addiction, but taking those into consideration, there's almost no reason to take anything else. Of course, that makes our S tier page Chained Wrath. This is similar to Musical Addiction, giving a buff to a single ally that boosts blunt dice power by 1 to 3 but fixes their speed at 1. While extremely strong, in a vacuum I'd say it's a bit weaker than Musical Addiction. The downside is really bad, but in a different way. Sometimes it won't matter, but sometimes it'll be extremely bad, and the upside is worse as well, giving only blunt dice to boost instead of all offensive dice. However, like with Clean, it's an S tier because of its synergy with the strongest. When combined with it, Clean and Mio's prowess, you give your defensive dice a permanent 5 power boost, your slash and pierce dice a permanent 8 power boost, and your blunt dice a permanent 9 to 11 power boost. Obviously, you don't need me to tell you that power boosts that large are pretty okay. Bringing us into the tier 3 pages, we have Music, which I put in D tier. This page gives a buff to all characters, making them deal 4 to 8 bonus damage with attacks, but also making them take 4 to 8 bonus stagger damage when hit. Additionally, whenever an ally defeats an enemy, they recover 15 HP in stagger resist. I'm not entirely sure why they worded it like that, when essentially everyone just deals 4 to 8 bonus damage in stagger damage, but anyways. This page just makes everyone die super quickly and gives your team a bonus of some recovery on kill. Unfortunately, while the effect is better for your librarians because you get to choose clashes, so you're more likely to get hits in, the effect doesn't give you any power, and if you start falling behind, which is slightly more likely to have already been happening since it's a -1 page, then you're very likely to just get steamrolled. Coffin is a middle tier 3 page, and I put it in B tier. This page gives a buff to a single ally that seals the speed die of enemies below 50% HP on hit, but only twice per scene, and then excludes mass attacks. Against bosses, this can often cut their damage output by half or more, and against regular enemies, it will just make them unable to act most of the time. This page is fantastic when you're behind or at parity, but doesn't do much when you're ahead, so it's just in B tier. Dark Flame then, as expected, is our S tier page. This page gives a buff to a single ally, giving them 1 to 2 haste and 2 to 4 strength each scene. Additionally, the resistances of all characters gets modified, with endured resistances becoming weak and ineffective becoming fatal. This page is quite similar to Music, making everyone take a bunch more damage, but giving an edge to your librarians. The difference here is that the upside is much stronger and characters end up taking a ton more damage. This page's buff also partially mitigates the downside that Music has, where if you start falling behind, you're very likely to get rolled because of the haste and strength, giving you a huge boost to your clashing potential. Overall, Yesod's floor is extremely strong, being ranked first in my floor rankings. In the next video, we'll be covering all of Hod's abnormalities. I'll see you soon, and as always, thank you for watching.